Hour number 3 of the Gary Sutton Show on a Wednesday morning. I'm fired up today. Yeah, I'm just tired of being lied to in my face, and no one really calls them, and people will say, well, they're walking back the truth. That's not really what he said. I speak Main Streetese. I don't know how to speak politicalese, and I get tired watching people who are supposed to be representing Main Street's views trying to speak politicalese and have us understand it. Apparently some aren't. Apparently some sit back and say, oh, wow, yeah, he's walking back the truth. Well, when you walk back the truth, that means you lied. Almost honest is dishonest, isn't it? Anyway, we might go a little lighter this half hour and a little heavier, too. And Curt Smith is our special guest. He's an acclaimed columnist, award-winning radio commentator and host. Wrote more speeches than anyone for former President George H.W. Bush. Has also been noted as an author of 15 books about baseball, including 2012's Mercy, a celebration of Fenway Park's centennial, told through Red Sox radio and TV. His books are fascinating, by the way, that he's written, and he's a fascinating guest, the best guest we've ever had on the morning news, and then later on here on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, Curt. Welcome back. Great to have you on.
Well, Gary, great to be on. How are you?
I am doing very well, and I know you're good because baseball season has started, right?
Well, it certainly brightens, I think, the mood of anyone, at least tangentially and briefly, depending upon the state of your team.
Exactly. Well, the Red Sox and the Orioles going at it, and we got the opening game, but we're about to play a second one here tonight. So,
right.
An outstanding opening game, too, by the way, 2-1.
Well, if you're an Orioles fan, but being a Red Sox fan, not that I remember, but I do recall that they got 9 hits and left 13 men on base. This reminds me of the bad old days of the Red Sox, upon which I grew up.
Yes, and you're not dwelling on that at all. You're not really, kind of lingering on that loss at all, right?
No, but this does bring back and evoke very, very bad memories of a childhood that lasted entirely too long.
I think somewhere inside
and I have the scar tissue to prove it.
I hear you. So you were one of those guys that kept on playing with these I don't want to say old age leagues, but the more senior leagues, so to speak.
No, I just I basically refer to a fact, and my frame of reference until 2004 was that one can never expect a happy ending because I never had one.
That's a good one. Inside all of us as guys, at least, and maybe women too to some degree, there lurks a young baseball player constantly waiting to get out, or a fan, or you're talking about it the next day around the water cooler or wherever you are in the office. It is one of the more unusual sports that way. With ESPN, the advent of the 24/7 sports cycle, we have that happening maybe in some of the other sports, but baseball kind of occupies a unique place, doesn't it?
I think so. Although I must say, in all honesty, that even as a child, I was never delusionary enough to think even for a moment that I could ever play Major League Baseball. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk about the old bromide that you can never buy first base. I couldn't even rent first base as a hitter, and so I learned very early on that if I was to ever have baseball as part of my life, it would not be demonstrably upon the field, and probably not behind the broadcast booth. Although I have written about the men who do that as voices of the game, but rather as a writer, and things worked out in that sense pretty well.
I had a chance to do minor league baseball here in New York for 3 years as a color man, and not really knowing much going in other than my baseball experience.
Right.
And I found it to be one of the more intriguing things because you ended up telling a lot of stories. And one of the great storytellers of all time, I thought, and he used to be with the Orioles, was John Miller, who could take a story at any moment and just mesmerize you, especially in like a 10-0 game, and you needed a story at that particular point to kind of keep your sanity.
Well, he's a dear friend and one of the great voices in the history of baseball. And, in fact, a plural when I say voices because he, of course, is one of the great mimics in baseball history. So he brings to the booth not simply himself, but Vin Scully and Chuck Thompson and Harry Carey, which is quite a trick since both Thompson and Carey have been dead for more than 10 years.
Exactly.
But, no, it's one of the books that I've written is entitled The Storytellers because storytelling is at the nub of baseball. The pace is slow enough so that you can intersperse stories between and among pitches, and it's during the spring and summer, which is one of the more lyric and stately and slow seasons of the year, and so it's a perfect match.
One of the interesting things I can remember, we hear so much about statistics today here on Obamacare and so forth, but in baseball,
some of them might someday be real, but of course not right now.
One of the things that I remember in baseball when I was growing up is I used to know the averages of just about every player, period, every day, and I checked them daily. But then when you heard announcers, and I think later on when I became a color guy for the 3 years I did minor league baseball, I really. And doing the talk radio show, I sensed the ridiculousness of some of these. For example, John Miller told a story one time about this one announcer that was doing a game, and I guess it was Pittsburgh playing Texas or somebody like that, and the Pittsburgh player, it was the Cobra out in left field, and
Dave Parker.
You got it, Dave Parker, and so he came to the plate, and so the announcer says, Dave Parker's batting .339, but against us he's only batting .338. Geez, what's our secret? That kind of thing. And I often, so we get hung up on statistics a lot of times, which takes me over into the evil empire just for a moment.
Yes.
With the statistics that are being thrown at us right now. You sit back and you look at this whole Obamacare thing. I had a guy this morning, Dr. David Hoberg, who said this is kind of the end of the beginning. You wonder what's coming next. And I talked to a couple of people this morning. I said, I'm so mad. I really am disgusted, because here's a guy who lied and lied and lied, not just about this, but about other things, but lied on this, about you can keep your doctor, you can keep your health care plan, period. And I said in my opening here to this segment, I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of, and apparently a lot of other people aren't, because they keep on supporting this guy, and I'm mesmerized by that.
Well, that's their problem, not yours.
Right.
And it's the country's problem, which I guess includes us, so it's ours as well. To quote Al Gore, who malapropped this aphorism, he said that leopards don't change their stripes, and that's true of Barack Obama as well. He simply didn't lie. He lies, and always will lie, because that's who he is, and that's what he does. He knew as he was pitching health care in 2009 that he was lying and telling untruths totally about keeping your doctor and keeping your health care coverage. He knew that all of this was not to protect the uninsured and to make sure that they would get insurance. We know that now because we actually have more uninsured than we had when this catastrophe began. He knew that this was instead a prescription for a socialized medicine and for the federal government to take over 1/6 of the economy because that's what he wants. He believes in socialized government, even though it's failed wherever it's been tried around the world. But, of course, facts don't dissuade him. You can give him 500 facts, and they won't dent his theology, which is socialism. Some have called it communism. I won't quarrel with that. I simply call it socialism. And he lies. And this preposterous potpourri of statistics is just convenient. And I'm sure just accidental. That on April Fool's Day, how wonderful that his administration, which of course is noted for such honor, that it accepts people now writing their name in on the honor code. I mean, Alfred Hitchcock, George Orwell wouldn't believe this stuff. That an administration which has never shown one scintilla of honor on one day of its tenure is now accepting people on the honor code. And just accidental and convenient, and just the way the numbers roll, that on the last day of your being able to subscribe, that it just happens to reach 7 million people. And, of course, we have no idea who signed up, no idea who's paid not simply a plug nickel, but even an Indian penny, no idea how many of them were insured or are insured, no idea about anything. This thing is patently ludicrous. It is an absolute calamity. It is the emblem of big government at its worst. He continues to lie. He basically has himself by individual fiat, by federal involvement, wrecked his own Obamacare because the guts of this has been stripped out by his own presidential directives. 38 of them now over the last 2 years. So what do you say? This is what he has done is verify every negative stereotype any conservative in this country had to say about him. Whatever conservatives said, no matter how awful they said about him, has come true. Think about that.
He
has lived down to every, down the key word, lived down to every expectation and prediction the worst conservative has said about him. This is what he has done. And yet, why do his own people support him? Some because of race, which is a disgusting reason.
Yes, it is.
To support anybody or oppose anyone for president of the United States. Others because we have in this country people who like socialism and verge on the cusp of communism, and they finally got their guy in the White House, so they support him. Some because they're ardent Democrats, and they don't care basically what happens to the country as long as their party controls the White House. And some because and this is an enormous key, some because they're too damn lazy to go out and earn a living and fend for themselves and contribute to society. They'd rather be a leech and live off society. Those, in my view, are the four main reasons why, amazingly, this worst president in the modern history of the United States, and very possibly in the history of the United States, still commands 40% of popular support in the United States of America.
We're speaking with Curt Smith, former presidential speechwriter and noted author of many baseball books. And, one of the things with baseball, Curt, I'm going to kind of flip back and forth here if I can do so eloquently, which with you, that's hard because you're one of the most eloquent people I've heard. But baseball's a game of rules. We've added the video this year to try to make it even more just. And yet, for Americans who look at life as a game of rules, as a Constitution as a set of rules by which we play, I think they're appalled right now at the lack of playing by the rules. And there's that disconnect between Main Street America and the evil empire inside the Beltway.
Well, this is the most lawless president in American history. And, of course, he's the most hypocritical, talking about transparency. No president has been less transparent than him. No president has been more removed from his campaign pledges than him. No president has engineered a greater gulf between what he said he would do and what he has done than him. And basically he has made a shambles of the Constitution. Law is what he says it is. This is in essence what we are. And, I will confess that I was wrong year and a half ago, and you had people call up on your show.
Yes.
And I had people call up on shows that I have hosted, and they called America a dictatorship. And I said, no, we don't live in a dictatorship. But if you define a dictatorship as a totalitarian system whereby you have someone who is unaccountable and who has a state-run media which particularly holds him or her unaccountable, and as a result, the head of that government can do, in essence, whatever they wish and be as irresponsible as they wish, and who can lie whenever they want, and who can speak Orwellian and who can say of vanilla, this is chocolate, and who can say of left, this is right, and never be held to account. And this goes on day after day after day. Then I would submit to you that we live today in a totalitarian system, because how different is the United States from that?
Curt, we're going to take a very quick break. We're going to come right back. We'll talk a little more baseball, a little bit more politics with Curt Smith, former presidential speechwriter for George H.W. Bush and noted author of many, many baseball books. He'll be right back with us here on The Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Curt Smith, former presidential speechwriter, noted author of many baseball books, an avid Boston Red Sox fan, with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. I want to come back and end on a positive note today, because if I talk about the other, it becomes too depressing after a while, Curt. But as you know, you look at all the baseball books you've written. You've written 15 books themselves. Do you have one that stands out as a favorite that really kind of captures your idea about baseball, what it means to the country?
Well, I think probably the book that is best known and had, if you would, the greatest influence was Voices of the Game, and that was published in 1992 by Simon & Schuster. It is, for lack of a better term, the most comprehensive book ever written on baseball broadcasting, and something like 650 pages, and it incorporates and encompasses the whole art of what we were talking about earlier, of play-by-play and analysis, particularly on radio and television. And I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, far from the world in person, of attending a game in person at the Yankee Stadium or Fenway Park. And so, the Mel Allens on radio and the Vin Scullys and Kurt Gowdy, Chuck Thompson, Harry Carey, people of this ilk, were companions for me and for tens of millions of people. Dizzy Dean on the Game of the Week on television, Saturday and Sunday, an extended member of the family. So this is a labor of love for me. And I think reading that book, people would, I hope, share that feeling and understand why I wrote it. And then there were other books as well that I think hopefully capture the different aspects of baseball, Story Stadiums, which is a history of every major league ballpark that baseball, big league ball, has ever been played within. So those two, I think, probably. And also a book that was not about baseball, but was about when I was a college student in the 1980s. I went back and talked to leaders of America that had led America 10 years earlier when I had been a student in college, from Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan to Betty Friedan and George Wallace and John Mitchell and Billy Graham and people of that ilk. And it didn't sell particularly well, but you know how it is. Your 4 years in college, to me, were the most crucial and certainly, I think, the most emotional that I ever spent in my life. And you never quite, if you're lucky, forget those 4 years.
You're right.
And so it meant a lot to me to put them down in ink and on paper and to relive them even now.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about voices, and I've had a chance to do work on TV and also on radio, as you have. And one of the things that's interesting about the voices, so many different ways of doing this, from a Dizzy Dean who could murder the English language and yet was endeared to audiences, to a Vin Scully who could make the 2-2 pitch sound like a tapestry. And then on TV now, you have people who then. I always thought on radio it was our job to help to paint the whole picture for people. But on TV, it was important to tell you what you weren't seeing within what you were seeing. And I think we have a lot of people that are really good at that today.
Well, it's not the same. I mean, radio is an art when it comes to broadcasting baseball. Lindsey Nelson said, when you do it on television, you supply the captions, and that's all. But you're right. And to pick Dean and Scully is particularly cogent on your part. Scully talking about, for example, a shortstop getting 1 and 3, and he says, he reminds me of the ancient mariner. He gets 1 and 3. And Dizzy Dean, on the other hand, talking about a batter, and he says he's standing confidentially at the plate. So you couldn't possibly get two broadcasters more disparate, more different, and yet both were stylists and both were beloved. So all of the great artists of the game that I've ever talked to, I think, Gary, without exception, preferred radio to do baseball.
Yeah, I was like you. I grew up at a time where the transistor was under my pillow many a night, listening to my beloved Orioles playing the Yankees or whoever, and of course Chuck Thompson. Keep the beer cold, FOB, full of birds. I mean, all the things were just fantastic. And so we latch on to that stuff, and it becomes part of, I guess, our fabric every day. About 30 seconds. That final thought.
Well, I think you're right. Chuck Thompson, when it comes to the Baltimore Orioles, he became as synonymous with the Birds as Frank Robinson did, even Brooks, Jim Palmer, Boog Powell, and they were, as I said, extended members of the family. They were idiosyncratic. They were eccentric. They reflected the region, the team, the ballpark. They reflected, our joys, worries, our confessions of the heart.
Right.
And they're gone, but they're not really gone because they're with us still.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in the stories that you've written as well, it certainly helped that along. Curt, thank you for taking the time with me this morning. It's always a pleasure having you on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You take care. Curt Smith, former presidential speechwriter for George H.W. Bush, and also a great writer of baseball. When we come back, it's your turn to make the call. What questions do you still have about Obamacare?